Money is a huge factor in relationships. It's a huge factor in life. It's a necessity for, us to cover all of our basic needs. And these days, especially like our millennials and Gen Zs, like we're in crippling amounts of student loan debt, and you're trying to figure out how to plan a wedding, maybe buy a house in the midst of all of these things. And so my advice to couples is always just to really think about like you and your partner sitting down and envisioning like what is it that you want in your future in the next 5-10 years, then putting your wedding in the context of those greater financial goals that have like a bigger ROI.
Welcome back. My name is Emily and I am the CEO and co-founder of Plenty. At Plenty, we're building the destination for couples to manage money together. My husband and I co-founded Plenty after we began merging finances, and we're shocked to find what a mess that could be. We've both been in Silicon Valley working in fintech for over a decade each, so we set out to build something better. Today, Plenty is a wealth platform helping modern couples invest and plan for their future together. We bring the investment strategies and products of the wealthy to the everyday household. And we know in relationship is not just about the products, it's also about the conversations. And talking about love and money is still new. So that's what we set out to do in our podcast, to hopefully make it a little bit easier for everybody listening. Today, I am very excited to welcome Jessica Bishop, the lady behind the Budget Savvy Bride, to our show. Having just gotten married ourselves last year, we went to the site multiple times looking for tips and advice, and I'm excited for her to also be here today to share some tips with all of you. Jessica Bishop is a wedding expert. She's a best-selling author, podcast host, and on-air presenter whose wedding planning advice and savings expertise has been featured on Good Morning America and CNBC, as well as in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Brides Magazine, Cosmo, Glamour, and many more publications. Her book, The Budget Savvy Wedding Planner and Organizer, which I would highly recommend for people planning your wedding. We loved it. It was so incredibly helpful. It is the #1 budget wedding planning book with over 250,000 copies sold. And her wedding planning podcast, The Bouquet Toss, is now airing in its 5th season. So thank you so much for being here today, Jessica.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we would love to hear the story and the inspiration behind starting Budget Savvy Bride. What, led you down that path of wanting to build this place that could support so many brides and weddings?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had no idea when I started it that it would turn into the resource that it is today. But I actually started the site as a personal journal almost. It was a personal blog. I was kind of documenting my own planning journey. It was eons ago now. It's crazy. I started in 2008 when I was planning my own wedding and I was engaged, and just keeping track of all the ideas and inspiration along the way because I was freshly out of college, and my partner and I were both on very, very entry-level salaries at the time, also in the midst of a recession that was happening at that time. And so our families weren't necessarily in a position to help us, financially with the wedding budget. And so we had to get creative. And I just, that's really how it started, and it kind of grew from there. And over the years, it has become more of a universal resource to couples all across the country and even internationally as well. We love to, share advice and tools and just anything that can help couples along the way with their plans. So yeah, it's been super fun, and it grew out of what was a need for me because there wasn't a lot of resources at that time for couples who had a smaller than average budget, let's say.
And at what point did you decide, hey, this is something that I started to just really document my own experience to, hey, I'm going to do this full time now and build a whole team and company around this?
Yeah, well, I'll say that I took a very measured approach. I'm very practical. I'm very budget savvy, as the name suggests. And so I actually ran the site as kind of a side hustle, a side project, a passion project for over 4 years before I finally took the leap into doing it full time. And so I wanted to make sure it was stable and intentional and doing it like in alignment with like my values and integrity. So yeah, it took me a while to feel brave enough to take the leap, but then once I did, it's just grown tremendously since I've been able to, invest my full-time effort into it.
Do you remember the moment or what happened when you were at that point when you were like, I'm ready to make this a full-time thing. I've done the homework, I've laid the foundation, now's the time.
Yeah, it's actually so interesting. So it happened in like the Christmas period of like 2012 leading into 2013. And something about that time, when I started, like blogging was very, very new, I would say, 2008. And then, as time went along, social media networks and platforms started popping up, Twitter, Facebook, and ultimately Pinterest is what was really the catalyst to me being able to take the site full time, because so many brides were on Pinterest looking for inspiration and ideas, and our content just started going viral on Pinterest, and we were receiving all of these visitors. And at that point, with our, ad revenue and things like that, I realized that that was the time to really take the leap and put in my full-time effort.
And do you remember the first time you then grew your team? Because going from you doing everything to now bringing on more people to help you build this, it's both exciting and scary.
Absolutely. Like, it's still something that I struggle with. And I always say, people always ask me, like, if you could go back and do anything, like you tell your younger self anything, what would it be? And I'm like, I would have started bringing on help sooner. Because it is a scary thing. It's being responsible for other people's income. It's, worrying about cash flow. And like, I don't have a business background, to be clear. I went to school for art. So I'm a creative through and through, and business was definitely not my like area of expertise. And I've learned so much along the way, and I'm still learning every day, now 16 years in. So yeah, it was probably around that like same time when I started putting in full-time effort. I started outsourcing certain things, small things at a time, and then growing and building upon those things. And now I have a team of about 6, all virtual and still all like freelancer sort of contract basis, but many of them have been with me for years. And it works because it's flexible for them, and it's affordable for me as well as a business owner. So, I would love to grow to the point where we have full-time staff, but always being smart and sustainable along the way for sure. So.
And one of the things you mentioned there is, if you could go back and speak to your younger self, if you could go back to speak to your younger self at the very beginning of this journey 16 years ago, is there something you would have wanted to say?
Oh my goodness. Yes. I've been doing a lot of inner child work lately and like journaling. But I really think what I would say to myself is to like trust myself more and be my own best advocate and like be more confident in what I bring to the table. Yeah, I think those would be the main things. When I started the blog, honestly, it was like a secret project that I was just doing, from my laptop on my couch, like, on my nights and weekends while I was engaged. And I didn't tell my friends, I didn't tell my family that I was doing it. I should have been like shouting that loud and proud. And I think I still struggle with that a little bit to this day, like putting myself out there. So yeah, I think definitely like not being shy to share, the things that you're working on, especially if it's something you're really excited about. I wish I had the confidence to do that a bit more. So
yeah. That's very relatable for me as well. I think at the beginning when we were starting to think about Plenty and we were starting to validate the idea, we had actually spent a month where Channing and I just stayed in a city and we were just heads down. And when everyone was asking us and our friends and family, they're like, what are you up to? We're like, oh, we're just tinkering. And we were, I think, still too nervous to really even be like, we're building a company. And it was just scary almost to be like, oh, if I'm that vulnerable, then it makes it real. And then what if I fail? And that, at least for us, was like definitely some of the thoughts that were going around.
Oh, that's so relatable. I mean, I just feel like, yeah, like speaking it out loud and making it real. Then people will know, like, if you don't follow through or if it's not a raging success or whatever. But at the same time, like, how much do you lose by not sharing it? And because one thing that I've realized over time is like, once I have shared it, and anytime I do share anything, the community of people in my life rally around me and they celebrate those things with me. And so, it's a beautiful thing to see. And like, it just encourages me to want to share more for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And fast forwarding now 16 years, how many brides and weddings have you supported?
Oh gosh. It's honestly feels impossible to calculate. Honestly, I don't work one-on-one with clients, or couples. I never have supported couples in that way, on like a wedding planning basis, but our site reaches millions every year.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's been a growth over time, but, in 2023, we reached 2.5 million users. And, then, when you think about like the book has been, 250,000 copies sold already, which is crazy. So I have no idea, but I'm happy to even be like a tiny, tiny bit of support and help to any couple who's getting married. And even if they just happened upon like a random article that gave them a savings tip, like that makes me so happy and fulfilled, because the biggest thing with all of it is just helping people.
Yeah. I remember because for Channing and I, we were amongst the first people in our wedding, in our friends group to start planning a wedding. And it was a little bit of, oh gosh, I don't even know like where to start, or are we going to accidentally forget a tradition that we didn't even know existed? And, are there customs here? And I think one of the things that has been so helpful was actually when we went to the site, we were able to actually see really helpful checklists, things not to forget, things where we're like, we're learning this for the first time. I am curious too, as you think about your journey to starting Budget Savvy Bride, weddings and customs have changed a lot. And so what are some of the customs that you have seen change a lot over the last 16 years of building Budget Savvy Bride?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the history of some of these traditions and customs when it comes to weddings. So much so that the first season of our podcast, The Bouquet Toss, is all about where those traditions came from, the historical roots and origins. And like some of them are kind of dark, to be honest. So it's pretty interesting. We loved putting that first season together, just examining all of those traditions. But I would say like the biggest thing that I've seen is kind of just couples feeling like the permission to do things their own way and maybe to not adhere so strongly to those traditions, especially if they don't feel authentic or aligned to them as individuals, as a couple. Anything from, the bride, walking herself down the aisle instead of being escorted by her dad, because it's like a very patriarchal custom. Some people still want that, and that's still meaningful to them, and that's beautiful. My, advice for all couples is to do what feels authentic and meaningful to you. So whatever that is, amazing. But we have seen a lot more sort of like diversion, I think, from those very, very traditional elements. Not so many like bridesmaids clones wearing all the same dress. We're seeing like more, mix and match, which I love, and I think is really great for the bridesmaids as well. And even doing things out of order, like different ceremony arrangements, or, having a cocktail party first and then the ceremony and then a reception, people are just making their own rules and doing it their way. And I think it's amazing.
Having had two people in my wedding party that I called them bridesmen because they were two of my closest guy friends. And I was like, I can't be up there without you. I love the fact too that I've also personally started seeing a lot more people do what just makes sense for who they are. So I love that. As you think about, the last couple years too, COVID obviously changed so much. Have you seen COVID really change what weddings look like or what weddings mean nowadays?
Yeah, honestly, I think COVID was such a reset for all of us, right? Like it really brought everyone back down to basics to really think like, what about life is even important to me anymore? You know what I mean? And so especially with the restrictions involved in like those really early days of the pandemic, where couples were like oh, we planned this wedding. We can't have it because of these restrictions, but we can have a tiny gathering of just our closest family members and still get married on the day we initially intended. And seeing that be so meaningful to those couples. Some of them still had the big party later. Some of them didn't. Some of them just were like, okay, we just had like the sweet, intimate ceremony and we saved a lot of money and that's fine. Yeah. So I think in a lot of ways, it just allowed everyone to slow down and really think about what actually matters to them and helped us all prioritize a little better. At least that would be my hope, is trying to find the silver lining out of all of the craziness that we went through. But I think it is reflected in the trends too. Like we are seeing, it kind of both ends of the spectrum, to be honest. Like we're seeing couples doing that more like elopement or like micro wedding style wedding. But then we are seeing the other side where it's like, if they have the money and they want to spend it, like spend it if you got it, throw a raging party. That's amazing too. Just don't go into debt. That's my only thing. Like just don't take on debt to pay for the wedding.
Yeah. I'm so curious about your thoughts there. Can you say more about, how you think about that, especially having seen and given guidance to so many couples?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no surprise to anyone. Money is a huge factor in relationships. It's a huge factor in life. It's a necessity for, us to cover all of our basic needs. And these days, especially like our millennials and Gen Zs, like we're in crippling amounts of student loan debt and you're trying to figure out how to plan a wedding, maybe buy a house in the midst of all of these things. And so, my advice to couples is always just to really think about like you and your partner sitting down and envisioning like, what is it that you want in your future in the next 5-10 years? Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to expand your family? Like all those things, and putting your wedding in the context of those greater, financial goals that have like a bigger ROI. Is that bad to say? Don't get me wrong. I love a wedding. I've been in the wedding industry for over 16 years, but like when we're talking about like long-term investment, of course, meaningful memories with the people who matter most to you are worth spending money on. But you have to prioritize and do it within your financial means, I think, and be responsible about it, because the last thing you want is the weight of debt and stress on your relationship as you begin your married life together. So that's like my little soapbox.
No, I love that. One of the best tips that we heard when we were planning our own wedding is, as much as time as you're spending visualizing the day of, also spend time visualizing 1 month later. Mm-hmm. And at the 1 month later mark, are you still going to care that much? And maybe you are. Maybe you will have cared that much that you're like, oh, the videographer was really important and we're glad that we put more money for that. Or maybe you're also going to be like, maybe for the flowers, the bigger package didn't necessarily have any lasting benefit. And maybe it does, but making sure that you pair, thinking both about the day as well as also thinking about afterwards, because it can help you also think about, okay, well, at that point, 1 month later, are you now feeling behind on where you wanted to be for saving up for buying your house together? Or are you actually really happy that you balance this with all the other things that are important for you?
Yeah, it's so true. I think it's very easy, especially post-pandemic, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of us came out of that restrictive, lockdown sort of period feeling like, I want to live my life like YOLO, So there is an element of that. And I think there's space for both. It's finding the balance and doing it in a financially wise way that's not going to steal from your future dreams, that you need those finances for. So yeah. That's like, I always worry that I'm coming across too like pushy, but really I just want the best for all of you.
Yeah, I love that. And it is so much of also thinking about those future dreams too, that I think for me, that really resonates, because it's not like, oh, you're just taking, from potentially one thing that you'd like to do just for the sake of doing that. It's not. It's all in service of other things you really want to do and other things that are important.
Yeah. And obviously you guys are helping people figure out how to make all those things happen financially. So
that's the goal. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to balance all the different goals that you two share. Yeah. As you're thinking too about, some of the things that you're seeing as key trends for 2024, you mentioned elopements and micro weddings. What are some of the other trends you're also seeing?
I think we're seeing a bit more of what is interesting to me is like a reduction in the number of like weddings that are big booze fests, for lack of a better term. We're seeing like a lot of sober and sober curious guests attending weddings. So, non-alcoholic cocktails or mocktails, and some completely booze-free dry weddings, as a reflection of like couples' values. I think it's really interesting. I think there's a ton of new options in terms of like non-alcoholic cocktail mixers and things like that. So it's like you can still have a festive beverage without the alcohol, which I think is really interesting and cool. And also just like more memory making sort of interactive elements. Like I'm sure you've seen the audio guest books that are like phones, like your guests can like pick up the phone and like leave you a voice message, and then they'll put it on a record for you that you can listen to on your anniversaries. Like those sorts of like interactive elements, they're just so meaningful. And I love seeing anything that just adds more of those like personal touches, gives you more tangible takeaways from the weddings that, don't just fade away after the big day is over. So I love seeing all of that.
Yeah. And as couples are thinking either about some of those touches, or more broadly to planning the rest of their wedding, do you have any tips for couples who want to be more budget savvy?
Yes. I mean, obviously the first, point of attack when it comes to trying to mitigate your costs is to keep your guest list as tight as possible. It's the simplest way to keep your costs down, but it can also be the most emotionally challenging because you're talking about people that you love, and trying to get that number down can be very, very challenging. And I understand that. But for every additional guest, it's an additional chair, program, invitation for a household, a place setting, a meal, beverage package, it really does add up across the board exponentially when you add additional guests. So guest list is always the first place to start. Then I always say to really like rank your priorities in terms of like what actually matters to you and your partner, and find the areas that maybe just like aren't so important to you. There are ways to cut back in any area of the wedding. It's just determining which ones matter most and which ones matter least to you. And so there's a few, companies that we work with that I think have provided some really incredible solutions. Especially when it comes to like flowers. Flowers is one that like really blows people's minds with how expensive it can be. And there's great like rental companies that, offer beautiful silk, floral arrangements that all cohesively match for your bouquets, your centerpieces, whatever. And you can mix and match fresh and fake, but you can significantly control and reduce the cost of what your, like wedding florals will cost you at the end of the day. So, and the company, I don't even think I said their name, Something Borrowed Blooms. They're incredible. So definitely recommend checking them out. But, really it's about your prioritize.
Mm-hmm. So Something Borrowed Blooms.
Yes. Something Borrowed, blooms. So.
And how much of a price saving is this too? So, our listeners can also get an understanding.
It's mind-blowing. Honestly, I think they say that they save their couples an average of like 70% versus the cost of fresh flowers, which is huge. I mean,
that is huge.
I hear of people spending like the equivalent of what I spent on my entire wedding in 2009 on just flowers. So I'm just like, good for you if you've got it. That's amazing. But like, would I like to save that money and spend it maybe on a honeymoon or a down payment on my house? Like, different for everyone, but
yeah, for sure. We also got some sticker shock the first 2 times we got quotes, and we were like, oh, that's multiples of what we thought that was gonna be.
Yeah, who knew?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially I think with flowers, it's gotten more so because of a lot of the flowers are grown outside of the country and flown in and everything, inflation. There's so many factors at play with the rising costs across the board. But flowers has been one area in particular that couples have been like continuously shocked by the cost.
Yeah.
So that's a good option for, if you're looking for ways to cut costs.
Any other tips or any other places where you're starting to see more and more people reevaluate what might be a more expensive option and have other options actually?
Yeah, I think there's so many, honestly. Like if you want to do a photo booth, like you can obviously pay your photographer or have somebody deliver a big booth and set it up for you. Or there are DIY options you can find online that are like direct, delivery. You order it online, they ship it to you, you set it up, you send it back. A much more affordable price. And a lot of them are like, self-service. So your guests can manage it themselves. You don't need to have an attendant there the whole night. So it really just depends on like your comfort level and how much you want to outsource versus how much you want to take on yourself. Obviously, time is money too at the end of the day. So for a lot of busy couples, like maybe they would rather just pay someone to take care of it, and that's totally fine too. It's all about finding like the options that work best for you and your situation. Trying to think about others in particular, but also if you were open to DIY and willing to do things yourself, there's some great guided floral DIY. So if you do really want fresh flowers, but you don't want to spend, to have a professional florist arrange them for you, excuse me. There's a great company called Bloom Culture Flowers where they will walk you through. They'll help you define like what you want it to look like. They'll do the whole like arrangement and recipe for you. And they'll even order the flowers and have them sent to you the week of the wedding and give you full tutorials on how to arrange them all yourself. So if you want to take that option, you can save thousands doing it that way too. But again, it's just, what do you have more of, time or money?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Speaking of that balance between time and money, I think a common question people also have when they start planning their wedding is, should I get a wedding planner? What's the difference between a wedding planner and a wedding coordinator? Or is there another path? First off, what are your thoughts on, when it's most helpful to have people who help you support with planning the wedding? And also, are there things where you're like, oh, this could make sense, especially if you have this type of wedding?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you are hosting an event with, 100 people or more, and you and your partner are both working full-time jobs, and you really feel like you don't have the time to do all the research and find all the options and all of that, like hiring a wedding planner can definitely be an asset because they're well connected. They know the best resources in your local area. They're going to have access to things that you might not know about. And it can save you money in the long run to have a planner. But if it's just not financially feasible, because depending on the type of planner you hire, some of them charge like a flat rate, some of them charge like a percentage of your overall wedding budget. So there's a lot of different things to consider where that's concerned. But it's also a thing where these days with the internet and the amount of resources that exist online, there's no reason that you can't plan it yourself if you have the time and want to dedicate the energy and effort into doing it. I feel like all my answers are like, it depends. I feel like a lawyer. Yeah. I'm like, well, it depends. But I mean, I always tell couples at a minimum to hire a coordinator for day of, month of. And that's just someone who's going to oversee the logistics on the day of. You don't want to be like the point person, like interacting with each vendor as they arrive and telling them where to go. It's your wedding day. You want to like be able to enjoy that and not have to manage any logistics on the day if you can avoid it. So that's always my recommendation at the minimum, is to have a coordinator for the day of.
And what's the difference between what someone who is a day of coordinator versus a month of coordinator would do? And how does that also compare to a full out wedding planner?
Right. Yeah. I would say that I think the term day of coordinator is almost like a myth because it really is more month of most of the time, because those planners who do offer that sort of service, they're liaising with you a month out because they have to get up to speed on all the logistics and all the ins and outs of what's going to be happening on that day so they can be properly prepared to execute it. So really, the proper term should probably be month of. But really the purpose of it is that they are there on site on the day of the wedding, overseeing all those logistics and making sure everything runs smoothly and, to your specifications. And basically, the difference between like a full service planner and like that more month of day of situation is like the full service planner is going to be with you like from step one. They're going to help you find all your vendors. They're, depending on the level of service they're providing and things like that, it can definitely vary. The thing about the wedding industry is it's like everything is like a snowflake. It's like every vendor is unique in the way they package their services. So it's always hard to give a one size fits all answer, but they typically are involved from the beginning and help you throughout the whole process and even handle contracts and payments and things like that. Whereas the month of person is more like you're passing the baton or like the playbook to them to execute for the day itself. So sorry if I'm rambling too much.
No, this is great. And I am wondering, for those couples right now who are right in the midst of wedding planning, if they're thinking about hiring either a planner or a month of coordinator, what are some questions that you'd recommend they ask them to see if there's a fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on each couple, obviously. I think no matter what type of vendor you're working with, you want to make sure that there's like a good rapport and a good, vibe, for lack of a better term. Questions that I think are important to ask would be, their level of like involvement based on whatever package it is that you're looking at. Because as I said, everyone's list of included services are so different. I've been on some calls recently with some, wedding planners who work with couples, and they talk about all the different things they've had to add to their contracts over the years because of strange situations they've encountered with very specific weddings over the years, whether it's like, I will not do Dove releases. I will not clean up bodily fluids. I will not be responsible for, these are things that they as business owners have had to add to their contracts because couples have asked absolutely wild things of them over the years. So they want to like protect their peace and boundaries. So, it's always important to review the contracts and, find out where, the limits and boundaries are of what they will and will not take care of on the day of or along the process, depending on what type of planner you're hiring.
That makes a lot of sense. And an area too where we've started hearing a little bit more conversation about people needing planners too, is especially what seems to be, at least to us, a bit more of a trend around destination weddings. Is that something you're also seeing? And how should couples think about when destination weddings can actually be a way to save money or when it can actually result in, costing a lot more altogether?
Yeah. I mean, again, I would say it depends. But I think it's this common, like, sort of, I don't want to call it a myth, but it's this message that's put out there like, oh, a destination wedding can save you money. And it can in certain circumstances, right? Because if you're planning an international destination wedding and, the majority of the people that you would consider inviting don't even have a passport yet, then like, yeah, they might not come. And therefore you will have less guests to host, which will inevitably cost less. But if you have a group of people who are all willing to travel, they're down to go on a getaway, you might have a huge group and it could cost you a lot. And, there's the additional travel on top of all of it too, which can add costs. So it really is like wedding planning and doing it within any budget, no matter what your budget is, does just require time in research, in weighing up your options, and like, in my experience, like the best way to be savvy about your decisions is to get as much information as possible so you can compare your options, in the most apples to apples way possible. It's never going to be an exact, science where that's concerned because of all the variables involved. But the more information you have, the better equipped you'll be to make the best decision for your situation. And that's especially true, I think, when it comes to destination weddings.
Yeah. And a rule of thumb actually that we came across that was extremely helpful for us was actually expect that everything will cost 10 to 20% more once that bills are actually coming in. So don't budget right up to that number that you want to hit, because you make it an even more stressful thing than strictly necessary, because inevitably there's an additional person who needs a meal or additional things that you hadn't thought about. So do plan to give yourself some extra buffer there.
Yes, buffer is so important. And one thing I would also say, going back to the destination thing, is like there are companies that specialize in destination wedding planning, and a lot of them especially deal with the more like resort style destination weddings, especially like any of the more like all-inclusive style resorts in like Mexico and the Caribbean. And a lot of times they have connections where it's like if you book a certain number of like room block, then the bride and groom get their room for free and they get their honeymoon for free. And there's all sorts of perks and things like that. So those are options, I think, that it can make it more affordable. So if you are interested in a destination wedding, I would seek out some like destination wedding experts for assistance there. Yeah.
Awesome. And one thing that we've also been seeing, ourselves included, we had a wedding where we celebrated, I would say, some of the more common traditions, like wearing a white dress, walking down the aisle. And we also celebrated a lot of Chinese traditions too, as part of our wedding celebrations. What advice would you have for couples who are navigating multiple cultural traditions as they're also trying to figure out the planning and the budgeting, and then also just what traditions to celebrate?
Yeah, it's such a personal like decision and conversation, and every family I think is like so unique, and especially when it comes to like their dynamics. So like my best advice for all couples navigating these sorts of conversations is to not just have the conversation with you and your partner, but also include your families, because you just never know like how important those things may or may not be to your family. And I think just like open, communication is like the best, first step. Obviously, I'm a big advocate of like doing what feels most authentic to you and your partner. But of course, you don't want to cause like a huge familial rift by not wearing, something that like grandma passed down, whatever the case might be. It's all balancing, respect and honoring your families, honoring your cultural traditions. And if you have to find a compromise, it doesn't have to look exactly the way, but if you can find ways of honoring all those elements, it usually just takes, conversations, I think.
Yeah. I also love that you said the things that may or may not be important, because there's also potentially the danger of assuming it's really important to your family, doing it, and then realizing it actually wasn't the most important thing to them. They would have been happy had you not gone and done that too.
Yeah. I've heard stories like that over the years. Like, oh, I thought my mom like would be so upset that we didn't get married in a church, and turns out like she wasn't. So yeah, I think just having open conversations about those things. At the end of the day, you're joining two families together, and so honoring your families by at least giving them the space to share their opinions is important. And it becomes especially more important if they are contributing financially to the wedding budget that you're planning with. So yeah, definitely a tricky thing to navigate, but openness and communication is key.
Openness and communication. I love that. And as you start to think about the year ahead for Budget Savvy Bride, what are you most excited about?
Oh my gosh. Actually, the thing that I'm most excited about is a project that we had been working on for 2 years, which we are finally finished with. It's our wedding vendor directory, which we've called the Savvy Wedding Guide. And it's going to be a vendor marketplace for couples to find local service providers in their area, within their budget. And so we just wanted to provide a platform for, vendors to market their services to the couples who visit our website. And that was kind of the last piece of the puzzle in terms of like resources that we didn't have to provide to our couples. So we're excited that that's finally live, and we're trying to find vendors to join so that there are resources there for our couples to explore.
I absolutely love that. I'm sure that will save so much time and money for couples. So thank you for building that for all the couples who will be getting married to come.
Yes. And anyone who is working with an amazing vendor, tell them to find us and sign up for a listing, because we've aimed to make it like very affordable and accessible for business owners, no matter what stage of business they're in. And yeah, I just want to have as many folks in there as possible so that we can serve couples all across the US.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Jessica, for coming on to our show. In the final few minutes, I had a few quick lightning round questions, if that sounds good to you.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
First question. What's a recent purchase that cost less than $100 that has dramatically improved your life?
Well, I'm going to have to show it to you. I don't have a Stanley Cup because I refuse to pay $70 for it, right? But I got a Simple Modern, which is like the budget savvy version of the Stanley Cup. So
and a very
it was
chic
like,
color.
I think less than half the price, keeps my drink cold, doesn't leak. I'm a big fan. I drink at least like one of these, at least one, but sometimes two a day. Staying hydrated.
Awesome. I'm going to ask for the link for that for sure. What is one of your favorite productivity hacks?
Well, I would say for me, I struggle with that, if I'm being completely honest. I think I'm productive, but I can be a bit scattered, and I have ADHD. I disclosed this to you before we jumped on to record, but one thing that has helped me a lot is adopting the use of a project management tool or a task management tool. So for Budget Savvy Bride, our team uses ClickUp to manage all of our to-dos and projects and content and all of that. And I've begun using it as well for like personal things, so that I remember, like, oh, I need to book this flight, or oh, I need to send this gift, or, whatever. So just making sure I'm writing down all the things so I don't forget them is huge for me. So find whatever platform or tool works for you, but
absolutely love that. Jessica and I were talking right before the show, actually, because we both have ADHD, and finding that is very, right now for me as well, writing things down is one of the most important habits that I can form to stay on track. Last
and you
question
said this is a lightning round, but I'm just like rambling every time you ask me a question.
No, this is great.
These are, I think, prime example of my ADHD in action.
Well, I appreciate all the tips and hacks that you've been sharing. Final question for this lightning round. What is a bucket list item that you and your partner share?
So my partner and I, we met in Bali 6 years ago, this month, actually. And, we have a love of travel. And I think one of our bucket list items that we've had kind of on our list is to do a trip to New Zealand. So, yeah. So not an item necessarily, but a trip. Experiences, I think, are really important to us. And we've kind of lived a bit of a nomadic sort of journey together since we've been together. So, but that's one we haven't been able to make happen yet. So still on the list.
Potentially something that 2024 brings, hopefully.
I don't know about this year, but it would be amazing if we could.
Well, if not, then you can set up a goal for traveling to New Zealand as a shared goal that you can set up within Plenty for 2025.
I love that.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for making time to be on the show today, for all these helpful tips for people who are in the thick of planning their weddings. Very excited to also share a lot of the resources that you mentioned today on the show too. So we'll also include that in all the show notes and links so everyone can also directly see all the great things that Jessica has built and her team has made available to other couples. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun.